I'm muted. There we go. Hey, folks. Sung here. Pleasure to meet you. My name rhymes with lung, like the air you breathe. And so that's a helpful reminder for you folks. We're going to give ourselves, 1 to 2 minutes here to reach kind of critical mass with all the registrants. But thank you for showing up on time. Really excited to get our hands dirty together and getting you to automate some of the work that you love doing. So I guess just as an icebreaker, looks like, all right, thanks, Leo. As an icebreaker, would love to just hear, where are you tuning in from? I'm tuning in from Los Angeles myself. Love it, sunny California. And so, yeah, how about you all? Nice, love Prague. Oh, dang. Okay, we're international. Oh, my goodness. International by default. Look at that. I love it. I feel like Mr. Worldwide. Oh, Mexico. Wow. Okay. Indianapolis. Very fun. Okay. Matthew. Very cool. Another LA person like myself. I'm going to put Leo on the spot here. But if you guys want to Google Leo Folsom, he's famous for another reason besides just working at Datafold. He was actually on The Amazing Race. And so take some time to Google that for like 15 seconds on your own. Cool. I'm going to start at the 3-minute mark here. And then set the tone for what this is going to look and feel like. Nice. It's a really great crew of people here. Just so you folks have some handy links available, make sure to open up a tab and save that. We're going to be using that for the walkthrough later today. Okay, great. So we'll officially get started. Again, my name is Sung. For those of you that trickled in just now, it's such a delight meeting you all. If you're here specifically to get your hands dirty with me to set up some automated CI/CD pipelines within your kind of DBT core project. And so just to set the stage, I think it's important to step back and understand like what problem we're solving for in the first place before we just click a bunch of buttons and change a bunch of settings here, just so it's grounded in just like what does success look like and why do we even care about that vision in the first place. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Keep in mind that I will not be looking at the chat in real time. Leo will be the chat moderator during this conversation, and he will get on camera and shout at me if a question is better served live on the call versus async in the chat in some reply threads with you all. All right, cool. So with that in mind, I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll take it from there. All right, beautiful. You should be able to, I'm going to do a quick flash. Beautiful. Okay, great. So what is CI and why you should care about it? I guess, just taking a step back, if I'm role playing as an analytics engineer or a data engineer, such as yourselves, I'm thinking to myself, whether I've just started my DBT experience or I've been doing it for a while now, that you probably have a bunch of SQL models that are chained together, creating some data marts, some star schema data models that you care about. You probably run some tests and run things locally on your terminal, whether you're in core or cloud, of like, hey, I want to make sure these primary keys that I created are unique and not null. Then you even have a documentation website. But then you think to yourself, like each time you merge code into production, there's always this kind of lingering doubt in the back of your head, like, hey, am I automating everything as expected? Am I making sure that there's like just proper friction points so that we have ultimate clarity that we know the impact of our changes and that what we're going to merge is exactly as we expect, right? And the point of CI is to, one, delete those guessing games in the first place in your overall DBT workflow, but also just save you a lot of time and energy just automating that work in the first place, right? And so what that looks like in just another story format is, let's say I'm a data engineer and I'm working on feature A. I have other teammates working on feature B and C, but let's just focus on feature A. I'm thinking to myself like, hey, I want to make a bunch of these really cool DBT code changes to better capture, revenue by month by very specific segments, right? From there, I want to do a workflow that is marked by the yellow here, where I make my code changes. I want some CI process or continuous integration, to be very clear what that acronym means, to run a bunch of things in a kind of contained environment, so I'm not accidentally messing things up in production, right? So I just have a clear, hey, here are the impact of the changes before you actually, merge them into this production green database. Once I feel really confident about all the changes I made in my CI process, from there, I'm going to merge my code in along with my other teammates, and then it will automatically update production for the latest DBT code changes that I made. So that the production database, and in this demo, it's going to be Snowflake in this particular case. It also works with BigQuery and what have you. It's exactly as I expect when I ran that pull request process in the first place, right? And so I guess just to illustrate this even further, I'm going to name this story very similar to what you saw on that slide, but specific to the UI in GitHub, just so you can digest it and it just feels a bit more real for what we're trying to accomplish today, right? And so this kind of role playing I'm going to do right now. It's assuming we've already done everything in place for the purposes of this training, and everything is just working as expected. So step one, I am making a bunch of DBT code changes that look like this, where I am updating, I'm selling some hypothetical software. I'm going to make sure I update my logic so I'm properly capturing individual users, so we can segment that group for particular revenue calculations, and update another DBT model because I just have some natural tribal knowledge of how my DBT project is set up, right? From there, I think to myself, oh, hey, like I ran a DBT code change. Hey, what checks were run as a result of this? Over here, I click on that tab, I see checks, and overall what it's doing is I'm installing, some dependencies so that DBT works properly. I run DBT deps, to make sure I have things like DBT utils and such there. I find the current pull request. And if I'm using some advanced things that I'm going to talk about towards the end of this tutorial, I'm going to grab the latest production manifest so that I'm only running my DBT code changes in scope and anything downstream of that listed by this command. And so what this syntax is essentially doing is saying like, hey, Sung, I'm running the 2 out of 100 DBT models that you have and anything downstream of that. And I know that because I'm deferring to a production manifest earlier. And if you're unfamiliar with some of this terminology, don't worry, I'm going to explain it in more depth later. Just going to continue to go on through this role playing. From there, this is assuming I am a Datafold cloud customer and I already have Datafold in place. I want to submit it to that to do some extra fancy stuff to supercharge this experience. From there, I know, hey, green checkmarks all around, everything is run and tested and validated. But what's really nice about Datafold, if those of you that are joining our Datafold cloud customers, is like, hey, like I want to make sure that I get the look and feel for what my data actually looks like. And I don't just want to trust green check marks alone, right? That's where I go over here. I get to click on view details. It's going to bounce me out to another tab to show me some data diffs, a very similar summary report, in addition to seeing the value level differences. And if there's downstream impact, also seeing column level lineage as a result of that. And so going back here, I'm like, great, looks good to me. Now, when I merge this, what's going to happen, right? So I'm going to actually go to a previous one that I merged earlier, where I'm like, hey, I merged this. Like, what happens as a result of me merging this in, right? From there, I get to see one, that I am dropping my PR schemas. And the reason we do this is so when you go through this exercise 50 times, 100 times in a row, there's not a bunch of bloat within your database schema, and that you're not eating up extra storage costs as a result of that, right? And then the next thing we do is when we go back here, I'm going to go to another example where, let me do this. Another example where we ran through this and merged it into prod. And then from there, it's going to run a deploy job within production. And it's going to mimic a lot of what we did within our pull request, where it's going to grab the production manifest and also run a build command to essentially say like, hey, like I want you to run all the latest changes. In this case, no change happens, so nothing runs, which is expected for this particular instance. But for that PR, it's going to run everything in scope related to that change and make sure it manifests within the production database and schema configurations that I want it to. And then I submit things to Datafold and to S3 for some of the more advanced users, say like, hey, here's the latest kind of production blueprint of the DBT project for subsequent PRs going forward. And so overall, that's the general workflow of this. If you're like me and need like a quick list of like, hey, like what does success look like at the end of this hands-on training? That's where I'm gonna refresh this. It's gonna look like this, where you have, assuming that you wanna go through the advanced part, but don't worry if you don't wanna touch S3, you're gonna have a CI pipeline that runs and tests everything of the changes that you care about. If you're a Datafold customer, some automated data diffs, you're gonna see some automated deployments of change DBT models in production and staging, schema cleanup, and then ultimately what matters to me is you just get that sweet sense of satisfaction that you accomplished something that's worth being proud of, right? And so with that in mind, I'm just gonna go straight into it in terms of the tutorial. I'm gonna pause here. I'm gonna take a quick glance at the chat for any questions. Okay, nothing so far. Great, so I'm gonna go straight into it. So step one, I sent this link earlier. I'll put it back in the chat just to make it really easy for you folks. That's the link you're gonna start at. Step one is I want you to fork this. And so what that looks like is when I click on that button, I'm going to make sure it's under my personal account. And I recommend personal just because if you do under your organization account, you may have some issues with permissions if you're not a GitHub admin. So highly recommend putting in your personal just so you can, hack and slash away at some settings and then create that fork. And so I'm going to give just, a 10 to 20 second pause for people to go through that step, and then I'll move on to the next one. And I will look at the chat while that is happening. And also for those of you that are like, hey, Sung, I want to learn this, but I don't want to take the time to fiddle around with settings and configurations. That's totally okay. I also designed it for those that want to passively listen and treat this like a podcast on their second monitor. That's totally fine. We're going to send you this recording afterwards. But for those of you that do want to be involved, I will honor that and include certain pauses just so you can do all the clicking that you need to do on your machine. Cool. That's about 10 to 20 seconds. So assuming that you've already forked this repo, the next thing to do is actually clone it into your local machine. And so I already have some of this set up, but what this would look and feel like is this, where I'm actually going to go back here. I'm going to make a temp directory. Oh, let me do this. And then I'm going to cd into it. From there, I would do this, where based off your fork, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to git clone this. I'm going to change directories into my fork. And then if you have VS Code installed and the kind of shortcuts, you can do code space period, and it opens that up in VS Code to the exact location that you should care about. And so if you need a repeat of those steps, you can make a temporary directory or just clone it to your desktop or CD into your desktop, git clone, change directories into it, and run the code. And again, I'm going to pause here for 10 to 20 seconds so that people can run this on their own machines. And I'm going to glance at the chat while we're waiting for that. Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. So I feel like Dora the Explorer right now. Okay, so after that, now I'm going to skip this S3 bucket setup just because I want to be mindful of the fact that not everyone has permissions to configure S3, but that's totally okay. And so I'm going to save this step for the end, but I just wanted to put it here just for general best practice when you are setting up DBT CI/CD jobs. All right. From there, I am going to pivot back to VS Code for the next set of steps from here. And keep in mind, my tech stack is using DBT Core, Snowflake, GitHub Actions, Datafold Cloud, and AWS S3. If you have any questions unique to your tech stack that requires a more in-depth conversation, highly recommend you schedule time with us post those questions in the chat, and Leo will do his best to help you. If you're running like, hey, Sung, like I don't use Snowflake, like do you have easy information to connect to other profiles such as like BigQuery or Redshift or what have you? I have that link. And so I'm going to send that there just to make it really easy for you so you can adjust your respective settings. But from there, my next step is to go here, and I want you to type to do. And what I want you to do is I explicitly made it exhaustive, where any time you see a to-do comment within this example DBT project, that is where I give explicit instructions for what you need to update. And so in this case, we would update this for relevant Snowflake account kind of production kind of configurations for the database and schema. If you're a Datafold customer, this is your data source ID related to your database, in this case, Snowflake. In addition to that, updating this for your relevant credentials if you folks are using Snowflake. And so if you're wondering like, hey, how exactly do I make sure that this is picking up locally, my credentials, that's where you do this in your local terminal, and you would just run this, as such here, okay? In addition to that, you are also going to update things within this, these GitHub actions in particular, where, again, you can save this step for later, but I guess for the purposes of this training, you can comment this out. I'm going to press Command/, but I want to leave this step in here just so in case you do want to use this towards the end of this tutorial for the Slim CI setup, you can do that. In addition to that, you can also remove some of these steps for the dbt build command. And so this is where I do this. And then dbt build, production profile for those credentials and database configurations. Ignore snapshots, totally makes sense. And then also do a full refresh. For the purpose of this self-contained example, if you are not a Datafold Cloud, or if you are a Datafold Cloud customer, you want to update this for your config ID related to Datafold CI. If you don't have it, no worries. I designed this to be modular. Command/, you just get to uncomment that. Same thing for this as well, right? In addition to that, it is the same thing for dbt staging. Very similar set of commands. You can comment out what you don't need, and this should work as expected. And then for this, make sure that anything that you change for this database setting for prod, that you update that appropriately within this. And so let's say I name this database to XYZ. This should also be XYZ, XYZ. And again, the purpose of this is to clean up our PR schemas so they're not eating up unnecessary storage costs within our database. So again, in summary, go to the to-do, follow the specific instructions to update all these things. And I'm going to give people 30 seconds to a minute here to update these for all the relevant settings. If you're like, hey, Sung, this is a lot to do in a minute, totally understandable. But for those of you that have these settings off the cuff, either in your secrets manager or what have you, you can plug and chug some of these things away now. And so I'll pause here and I'll let you know when we're ready to pick back up. Great. This is serendipitous since there's a pause. So Peter, I'm going to repeat your question for the crowd. Do you all generally envision this being set up as a CI pipeline that can be run on proposed changes by engineers across the company? Or is this mostly run against PRs from people within the data org? Primarily against PRs from people within the data org. Great question, Peter. Okay, Oris, yeah, that is a great question. Why did I include those defer commands? I'm going to actually go back to VS Code. Why we include these is because, actually, let me undo all these changes just to make it really clean. The reason why we include these commands, and I'll explain in plainer terms, is dbt build. So it's going to run, test, and upload the dbt seeds within my database. Target prod, that is my production profile over here to use these set of configurations and credentials. From there, I have select state modify plus, and this syntax is essentially saying, hey, Sung, only run the dbt code that changed and anything downstream of that that is impacted by those code changes. And this is syntax to say like, hey, Sung, if we are using S3 for Slim CI, which I will explain towards the end of this tutorial, we're going to defer to that. So DBT understands, hey, what actually did change? So it's a clear before and after story. From there, I'm going to exclude snapshots because typically we want to run those on a specific schedule in production rather than in CI. A full refresh because this is a self-contained example, so I want to make sure all the seeds are there. And it overwrites versus keeps appending onto it. And then just to make sure we're using the exact profile as expected, we make it explicit to make sure we're only running the profile within the root directory. Should we also exclude incremental models? Yes, typically in CI. And so if you want, and if you would have this in your pull request, you would just delete that flag, right? And go from there. Or you're like, hey, actually, I don't care about running, incrementals at all. You can also exclude those as well if you, want to do that. Cool. So assuming that you've already set up all these configurations / like, hey, like I just want to passively listen, totally fine. Let's keep going from there. From there, I'm like, okay, I set up all these settings. Now we need to update these within GitHub Actions. And so I'm going to actually go back to the GitHub UI. And from there, in your own respective fork, you're going to click on Settings. You are going to go to Secrets and Variables. You click on Actions. And then from there, New Repository Secret. And then make sure you have all the relevant configurations like a Snowflake account. I would do that. Snowflake account, enter the secret, and that's it. So I'm going to give pause for 10 to 20 seconds for people to fill out this information. And the reason we need to do this is so that these environment variables that are encrypted will help us authenticate to the relevant services within our pull request GitHub Actions. Right. I'm going to bounce back to the chat, see if there's any questions. Okay, great. So let's just assume everyone's already set up. From there, what I want you to do is run this locally on your machine. And so what that looks like is running a bunch of these commands. And what this is essentially doing is it's creating a virtual environment and installing all of these respective dependencies for the GitHub Actions to work and scope. From there, if you need to test like, hey, is this doing what we want? Do which DBT and make sure it's pointing to that respective DBT path. And then from there, I run dbt debug just to make extra sure everything's working as expected. And bam, yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of testing that. Also, if this is your first time running this, you are going to run this command in order to build everything in your production environment. And that's specifically everything you configured within this prod setting over here. All right, actually, I'm gonna run that with the full refresh flag just to make sure there are no unintended inserts with the seeds. Okay, great. And give me 1 sec as I have to charge my keyboard. Okay, cool. So next thing from there is if you're in VS Code or if you're just from the command line, you need to add all your changes and commit them for all the updated settings that you created or updated in your respective to-dos. And then you are going to push that. And so let me even just make a dummy commit just to make this feel a bit more real. I'll do this, add a space. I'm going to add that, dummy commit. I'm going to click sync changes. And I'm going to go back into my own quote unquote forked repo. If I'm you, I should see this automatically run and go through all the steps that I expect. And just to reiterate this point, it's installing the relevant requirements, such as like dbt, dbt Snowflake, In addition to that, it's going to grab some stuff. And keep in mind, this is a step I intentionally skipped that I'll talk towards the end because it's a bit more advanced. From there, it's going to run a dbt build command. I expect it to run nothing because I have Slim CI in place. It's going to exclude everything. Yep, everything works. And so after you make all your updates, folks, everything should work as expected. And you should see a nice green check mark. So I'll pause for 10 to 20 seconds and have you folks go through that. Okay, great. Next step is within your VS Code environment or your local dbt project, I want you to check out our new branch. In this case, I'm going to name it branch v2. And when I do that, from there, I'm going to make some changes such as this, where I copy and paste some example DB changes here, replace what I have there. Same thing for the sales sync file. Bam. From there, I'm going to commit these changes. I'm going to commit. I'm going to publish this branch. And then I'm going to create a pull request. I'm going to create it. I'm going to go. It's going to take me straight there. And now something's already running. And again, these are the code changes. These are the same examples I showed you earlier at the beginning of this conversation. From there, it's running a bunch of stuff. And now we're going to reiterate these points. I'm going to install a bunch of requirements, run dbt deps. If I have any packages I need to install, we'll ignore this step for now. And then dbt build. And so I'll give folks 30 seconds to a minute for you all to run this yourself. Again, you create a new branch, copy and paste those changes in this subfolder into the subfolder's core and sync for those respective file names, push it to your fork remote, and open up a pull request. And now if you're wondering like, hey, Sung, I don't have fancy VS Code extensions to do all that for me with a nice pop-up, that's okay too. That's where you can literally do this, new pull request, pick a random branch, create it, and move on from there. Go back here. Here, looks like everything worked as expected. I'm gonna go back to this dbt build command, and it ran. You get all these nice green kind of check marks. Everything's good. And then if I have Datafold installed, I can also run diffs that look like this. And keep in mind, I'm intentionally breezing over the Datafold piece. As I mentioned, a lot of you folks are not customers yet. Cool. I'm gonna go back to the chat to see if there are any questions. Let's see. How did I decide on how many threads to use in our profiles? Does it depend on the warehouse size? That is a great question. I do not believe it's dependent on the warehouse size. It is dependent on the number of threads on your local CPU. And so I just picked 24 arbitrarily just because I worked at dbt Labs for the past 2 years, and that was just a good rule of thumb for the Docker pods that were running dbt Cloud. And so I just copied that and translated it to my local computer environment. And so for those of you that don't know, for thread settings, this is essentially saying like, hey, how many concurrent dbt models am I running at any given time? And so if, for example, if I set this to 1, only one dbt model will run at a time, quote unquote, in parallel. And so this just makes sure that 24 dbt operations can run at any given time to speed things up. Great question, Horst. All right, I'm going to refresh this. Bam, Datafold works as expected. And what's also really cool here, if you are a Datafold Cloud customer, is that you get to see column level lineage impact in addition to those value diffs that I showed earlier at the beginning of this conversation, in addition to seeing potential downstream impact that is dynamically intelligent to know like, hey, Sung, you updated changes in subplan. We're only going to show you the objects related to that. If you're like, hey, I want to see this in a graphical format just to really digest all these changes, you can open up that in lineage and you get full column level lineage through all your downstream tables, in addition to data apps, whether it be Tableau, Looker, High Touch, you name it. Okay, great. I'm going to go back to the PR. And now going through very similar role playing, like, hey, I made all these really cool changes. What do I do next? From there, you are going to squash and merge. Highly recommend doing that just because it bundles everything into one commit. Okay, everything's into the main now. From there, I go to VL demo. You'll notice here, something's already kicking off. From there, it's going to run through all those very similar steps and only run the changes in scope and anything downstream as a result of the PR being merged. But in your case, it's just going to build everything under the sun, which makes sense because we skipped the S3 step for now. All right, I'm going to give people 10 to 20 seconds to go through those clicks. And all right, beautiful. And that, my friends, is pretty much the whole basic workflow when it comes to setting up your CI pipelines. And what's really powerful about this is like, let's say, oh, hey, this like a very like niche edge case, and I want to revert things. Like, how do I go about undoing some of this work? That's where you don't have to fret too hard. Or I can do this. I can revert this pull request. I'm going to create that pull request. It's going to run through all those changes in scope that I expect. You'll notice here, my change is the before, the original is the after now, right? It's going to run a bunch of those checks, and I just go repeat that exact same workflow, and then I'm back to the original production state without having to run a bunch of crazy fire drills, DM a bunch of people. I just have to click a couple buttons. I don't even actually have to code anything. And I get to move on and just take a breather and have some buffer to actually investigate the issues before I merge the changes again. Okay, great. And now I'm going to let this breathe a bit to let me know if you have any questions, and I'm going to walk through the S3 step. Yes, and just to clarify that point further, Edson, the reason why I do state modified plus versus just state modified. Wait, if we already had, would it be simply enough? I would say actually no. That's the short answer. No, it is not enough to simply focus on state modified. You need that plus sign because you want to see how your code changes also impact the data of those downstream DBT models, even if you didn't change any code in those downstream DBT models. A totally fair question. Totally fair question. Okay, great. Assuming that people that have already gone through this in their own personal setup are having green check marks all around or passively listening, happy to talk through some of the more advanced stuff of like, hey, how do I exactly utilize Slim CI in the first place, right? Which in plain terms is like, hey, I only want DBT to run the changes in scope and anything downstream of it. All right. So from there, assuming that you have AWS access, you are going to log into AWS. Keep in mind, I'm using my personal account. I'm going to actually go to the home page, just so we're all starting at the same place. From there, I want to set up an S3 bucket. I want to set up a unique DBT S3 user and a policy so that that user is only interacting with that specific S3 bucket for the right reasons, right? From there, I'll click in the search. I'll click on buckets. I'm going to create a new bucket. I'm going to pick US West 2. I'm going to do yet another DBT manifest bucket. I'm going to save that in my notepad for later. From there, I'm going to enable versioning just so I can keep track of all the production manifests. I keep uploading it to it. From there, you just create the bucket. Beautiful. From there, I go here. I would upload, and I'm going to go here. Then you have to do this manually the first time up front, and that's the only time you have to do it manually. From there, I'm going to reveal this in Finder. I will actually do this. Drag and drop there. Upload. And that's it in terms of uploading it manually for the first and only time you need to do it. Okay. From there, I'm going to create an S3 policy. Go to policies. I'm going to create a policy. Click on JSON, and I'm going to copy and paste a bunch of stuff here. Okay. And I'm also going to put this in the chat, just so it's really easy for you folks to follow this example. From there, I update my bucket that I just created. In this case, it would be, I have this in my local notes. This is the bucket name. Click next. Name it as such. Create the policy. And now I'm going to make sure that came up. Yep, this is exactly what I expect. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right. From there, I'm going to create a user. Get another DBT user. Click next. I'm going to attach policies, and this is the one I just created over here. I click next. I'm going to create that user. From there, I'm going to click on yet another DBT user. I am going to create an access key, third-party service, because our GitHub Actions are going to use this. I click next, create access key, and these are the values that I want. These are the values that are going to be leveraged by my GitHub Actions over here, mindfully lines 32 and 33. And this is where I make sure to update my bucket for that specific name. Because in plainer terms, what this is doing is based off the AWS S3 CLI, it will copy and paste the S3 file into our local directory in the GitHub Actions machine that's running all of this in the first place. Okay. And also, as a reminder, you need to go to your GitHub settings, and you need to, where is this? Actions, and include those repository secrets over there. So I know I went through a lot with that setup. For those that are unfamiliar with setting up all those IAM policies, totally get it. If you need something to listen on your own time in a more specific format, I have a very specific video tutorial within the README just to make it easier for you folks. I'll post it in the chat just to make it really simple for you folks. So you can look at it at your own, or like, hey, you need to talk to your security people, submit a Jira ticket, what have you. You can send that video tutorial. So it's really clear of like, hey, this is exactly what we need. You can use Terraform, CloudFormation templates, whatever your organization uses to set up permissions like this. But essentially, when you do have this permission fully set up, what's really nice is if you uncommented this out earlier, you can comment that back in. And so this is probably what you did if you followed along live in the demo before this step. Now uncomment that, update these respective settings, namely this, then you're good to go. And then from there, each time you run your pull requests, what's really nice is, let's go here. Let's make sure this is the revert I wanted. Yep. What's really nice about this is it's going to run everything downstream, as I expect, over here, right? Because I grabbed the production manifest from a bucket I created earlier. Based off this syntax, it's going to make sure to only run the things in scope and anything downstream of that. And then when I squash and merge, it's going to go through that same example of only touching the things in prod that I want it to. Go back here, things are kicking back off, and I get to move on with my life. And so, just in summation, at the end of this, assuming you follow along with every step actively with your own hands, you now have a Slim CI pipeline that runs tests only the changes that you made and anything downstream. You have automated deployment of DBT models to production, and you clean up your staging schemas. And now, going forward, this is hours of work you just don't have to care about anymore because these CI/CD processes do all of that plumbing for you. So I know there's a lot of steps. I'm sure there's some nuances that I missed. And so I'm going to go back, look at the chat. Any questions for me? How does this feel? Did you get that sweet sense of satisfaction automating your high quality work? Let me know in the chat. More of a savory sense. I like that. Leo's all about the umami. I guess, oh, Lisa, you're typing. I'll let you finish your question. Is it accurate that the main use is to have a place to store? Yes, that is correct, Lisa. Great question. I guess I'll ask the crowd. Can you give me a simple +1 or yeah? Or I'll make it simple for you guys. Can I get a simple yes or no? Was this helpful for you all? Nice. Thanks, Edson. I'm just going to look at the poll. I don't know what he asked. Yes, I did. Submit vote, baby. All right. Okay, so I see some nice thumbs up. Beautiful. Nice. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, Oris, do you ever see projects that use two separate Snowflake databases? One for the logic business layer and one for the analytic semantic layer. Are there extra considerations in the CI when doing so? Yes, I've seen that. And so the short answer is I've seen people update their respective model configuration over here in order to make sure you dynamically place certain models from a core subfolder into like a core schema or core database within your Snowflake environment. I don't have those code snippets off the top of my head, but yes, some people do that and it'll dynamically pick it up. The GitHub actions, I should say, will dynamically pick it up because the configuration is happening at the DBT project YAML level. If you're like, hey, I want to use environment variables to switch things up, you can easily do that within your profile settings by essentially doing this with your various schemas and your databases and warehouses and what have you. And then make sure to update your GitHub action accordingly to say like, hey, like in this case, for the secret, I want to make sure it's loading things in, XYZ schema or database versus ABC schema or database, right? Just keeps things more organized there. Great question. And then, given we have some time, Spartak, I can actually show you what DataDiff looks like because it's part of these configurations. But essentially, let me run this again. But if you have since you have DataDiff already installed, what's really nice about this is with open source, I'm going to run everything based off the changes I made in my feature branch. I'm going to run DataDiff-dbt. This double ampersand is essentially just chaining these commands together in the terminal. And what's really nice is, especially with the latest release that I helped ship out with 11.0, you get a nice little summary report before you even have to open up a PR in order to see these changes in the first place. And now you're thinking to yourself like, hey, like if this is your first time seeing it, like how exactly did the DataDiff CLI know that these are my primary keys? That's where we automatically pick things up If you have a unique test on the first column of your model defined in a schema file, we treat that as the primary key. Or if you have a tag, we use this as the primary dependency to show this of like, hey, that's our identifier for unique rows. And then we show you this full summary report. Now you're thinking to yourself like, oh, hey, like how else does Datafold get supercharged with Datafold Cloud? That's where when you add that flag, and assuming you have API key set up, it will automatically run diffs and also show you a lot more information that you care about in terms of data app dependencies. And note, this will take slightly longer because we're doing extra operations to like profile the data and such and get some other information. Let's see here. But any questions on that, Spartak? Does that answer your question? All right, I'll take that silence as a yes. All right, anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, fantastic. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Again, we're gonna send this recording and see if you're like, hey, it was tough to follow along. I needed to slow down in certain places. Don't worry, we got you covered. We're gonna send this out later. You have this full self-contained GitHub repo that I sent earlier. Again, for those that are passively listening, I'm gonna send that again. But yeah, if you wanna go more in depth, if you have specific questions about your setup, if you wanna fine tune this and evolve this even more than the basic examples that I showed you, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. And it looks like Leo sent you a calendar link in order to set up those conversations in the first place. But with that in mind, that's about it. And so we're going to leave the rest just for a freeform jazz Q&A and take it from there. Thanks so much, folks. You're welcome, Edson. Appreciate you. Is it better to authenticate Snowflake in the CI through RSA key or user password? It really depends on your security posture. I've seen 99% of CI processes use user and password because those values are encrypted at the GitHub secrets level. And so you can't just like accidentally print them out. But I also have seen people that, depending on their organization security posture, prefer RSA keys and just want to rotate those. And so either way, it works. If you want to really lock it down, you can create a net new Snowflake user versus using your own personal username and password to say, hey, this is the GitHub Actions DBT Snowflake user. You can do that as well, just so you can look at query history, just to audit those logs that it's only doing what you want it to do. Great question, Norris. Great. Any other questions for me? Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Oris. All right, Sean, you got a question. When doing CI with GitHub Actions, where is the compute running from in the instance to run DBT? Oh, that's on the Ubuntu machine running that, or the virtual machine that GitHub is running on your behalf. Yes, the cloud, hand waving motions. Yep, fair question. Cool. I'll give us one more minute, and then I will sign everyone out and give you back some leftover time. All right, beautiful. So with that in mind, I'm going to end this call, but it was such a delight. I've done this a bajillion times over during my time at DPT Labs and Datafold, and I always love doing it just because there's nothing like I'll use Leo's word, savory satisfaction of just automating work to just move on with my life, right? All right, Leo, I'll let you finish your final statement and end this call. All right, thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate you. All right, Leo, I'm done. I'm done with your dad jokes. Bye, everyone.